Welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. I'm Steve Gibson.
I'm Ben Matlock.
We're back. Hope you all missed us.
Late night recording.
Yeah, this could be interesting. Yeah.
We might find out the show died when I changed jobs and fucked up the schedule. We might find out this shit doesn't work.
No, yeah. I don't know. On top of it, because we would have been back last week probably, but my daughter got something from daycare and she was sick, real sick all week. Nothing like scary sick. She had a temperature for a little while, but just cough and snot. And when you're a 2-year-old that's sick, you throw a fit all the fucking time. And I'm like, there's no way I can do this show. And now me and Tara have whatever she had, so
and we're both throwing fits.
Yeah. And we're recording late at night instead of right after work for me. So this could be interesting. We'll see. And my point of the sick thing was I took some Dayquil before not Dayquil. I think it's Tylenol brand, same stuff. And the only thing I had to grab real conveniently and take downstairs with me to drink, so I had liquids during the show's beer. So this could be real interesting, real fast.
Tylenol car bomb.
Yeah. I was trying to come up with a good name for that cocktail, but I can't.
It's a fucking death. Just the Black Death, because it's a Guinness.
You know, it's good when like the medicine you're taking is like, do not mix with alcohol, and you're like, or mix with alcohol.
Well, most of the time, like they tell you not to do that because it will have bad effects on your liver, and livers are kind of pieces of shit anyway. So fuck them.
Technically, this one says do not take with more than 3 drinks, so I got 2 to go.
Well, Guinness is worth like 5.
Yeah.
Not in like alcohol content and weight.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially, like I said, I actually bought this for a recipe I was cooking that called for beer. It was like a stew. It was really good in a slow cooker. But I just grabbed it because it was easy, but it's been sitting out. I didn't have it refrigerated because it wasn't for drinking specifically. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, yeah, but it's Guinness, European, they drink room temperature. They don't drink room temperature beer. It's just they don't necessarily drink as cold as we. Yeah. So it's serviceable, but I'm not, so we'll see how this mixes. So anyway, yeah.
So what's up, guys? Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, we're going to take a second before we start to tune into the chat, even though this isn't a live show. Any questions out there?
Yeah.
No, huh? Weird.
Can I get some Steve fucked up the countdown in the chat, please?
Technically, it's a count up. That's the problem. Yeah. 2 weeks off, and I don't know. We've done this show for 20 years. We have been
podcasting
10 years.
For almost 10 years.
10 years, yeah. And we've had basically the same like wind up to every episode. Even when we were live, it was very similar.
Yeah.
We didn't really, but 2 weeks off and I completely fuck it up. So
one fucking car bomb later, and you can't even keep your head straight. Which is good because it's your week to have a topic.
Yeah. And I've got a good one, I think. But before we get into it, a couple things. If you've not listened to the show, I apologize for this being your first episode to come in. Actually, no, I think we're starting better than we normally do.
Every episode is someone's first episode, and every episode, we're sorry.
Sorry, yes. Every week we tell each other random stories from the internet. Sometimes they're true things like history things or just funny things or science or interesting. A lot of times they're things like creepypastas or urban legends or mythical creatures, that kind of stuff. But really it's just anything that we find that we think is interesting enough to talk about. So this week I wasn't sure. I was kicking around a few ideas and it was on the brink of a creepypasta episode, but I was really trying to hold off on like the horror, scary type stuff because we're coming into like, we've got a couple shows and then we'll be like in Halloween, October.
You say that every year, and like, I'm just at a point now. It's like, dude, like 90% of this show is Halloween themed.
Well, yeah, but I haven't. I found a topic that I'll be doing in October. That it's not a creepypasta, but it was like, it's ghost stories. Spoiler alert. But I thought we're close enough. I'll hold off on that. So I found something else, and this is right up our wheelhouse. Although I don't think we've done it in a while. And I found 3 really interesting unsolved murders that I'll be talking about. But I did kind of want to give a kind of a trigger warning, a content warning, if you will, because there is, it's murders, and there is
fucked up. Yeah.
Well, there is some violence against women, especially one of the stories where it's some of them, some of the victims are women, but it wasn't because they're women. One of them it was kind of that stalkery type deal. Yeah. So if that's something that you don't want to listen to,
if you don't want in on
maybe
this
don't.
shit,
yeah. We don't do a ton of those like content trigger warnings, but that is one of those. That,
I mean, we actually, for as much of a piece of shit as I am, we actually don't dwell in stories. Like, we don't dwell in the gore and the brutality too much when we tackle these stories, but sometimes the content just means you can't avoid it. So
yeah, and it doesn't. I don't go into gruesome details about it's people being murdered, so it's gruesome, but it's not that. It's just if you specifically
heads up,
yeah, it's murder, and it's real murder. So, but anyway, the first one was the Phantom Killer of Texarcana, which I always love when I hear the city Texarkana, because I have to double check. Is that a real city, or is that just slang for that rural area between Arkansas and Texas? And it's a real city.
It is, and I fucking hate that name.
Yeah, because it's literally on the border. Half the city is in Texas, half's in Arkansas.
And there's just 2 pissant Southerners who could not fucking agree or come up with a real name. And they're just fine, this side's Tex and that side's Arcana.
Yes.
Pieces of shit.
Texarkana. And that's exactly what it is. So on the evening of February 22nd, 1946, Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean LeRae were parked in a secluded road near a small town known as Texarkana. Like I just said, which is apparently in both Texas and Arkansas, hence the name. When they were approached by a stranger who blinded them with his flashlight, at gunpoint, the man ordered the couple out of the vehicle. He forced Jimmy Hollis to drop his pants and then severely beat him around the head with his pistol. And then he told Miss LeRae to run. And when she began running towards the wooded ditch and the woods, he yelled out to her. He's like, "No, run out, head up the road, you idiot." So she did, and then he chased her down and sexually assaulted her before once again telling her to run away. And this time she escaped.
Yeah. Unless you're in that moment, you can't imagine the fear and that headspace you're in.
Oh, no, she was probably running through the forest first, and she probably shouldn't have listened to him.
That's what I mean, though, is you're somebody has a gun on you, you're kind of just being
They say run, you just run.
Yeah.
So when I said you idiot, I don't mean she was an idiot. He wanted her to go up the road when she didn't. He's like, hey, no, go that way. He was clearly just kind of being I
do wish that I would have the frame of mind to be like, fuck you. You told me to run. You don't get to change it.
Right. So anyway, he did sexually assault her, but he told her to run again, and that time she got away. So I don't know if she escaped or if he kind of let her go. This was clearly some kind of scenario that he was trying to reenact or play out. Jimmy also survived. He seemed to be trying to beat Jimmy to death, but Jimmy did live, making him and Miss LeRae both the first known victims of the Phantom Killer and 2 of the few to ever survive their encounters with the guy. In March, the bodies of Richard Griffin, a 29-year-old carpenter and military vet, and his date, 17-year-old Polly Ann Moore, were found in a car that had also been parked at the end of a secluded road. Both had been shot in the back of the head.
See, this is a problem when you're dating in Texarkana. The only thing to do is just take that special gal and drive her to fucking nowhere.
Well, you know what? we could get really deep into the societal issues of like the problem of stigmatizing premarital sex, but that's exactly what this led to. Because back at that time,
That's true.
The reason that they were all going to these spots, they were going there to
do
stuff.
Because God damn it.
Because you couldn't do it anywhere. If people saw you, you got, shunned.
Because we have such a fucking bitch baby society that we can't coordinate. Like, hey, mom and dad, when you're grocery shopping, knock first when you get there.
Make sure you're talking loudly when you walk into the house so that I know you're here.
Get one of those horns that goes da 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 da. That way I know you're home.
And hit it all the way down the street just in case I'm distracted.
Oh man, I think I would be a good dad because I would make sure I had one of those horns.
Well, but it's one of those things. As the dad, you don't want to walk in on that either.
Absolutely not. I would be that asshole. Like, I'm coming up the hallway. Yeah, because I want nothing to do with it.
So a few weeks after those two were murdered, the Phantom would claim his next two victims, Betty Jo Booker. She would be the killer's youngest victim at just 15 years old. Betty played saxophone in a band, and on the night she was killed, she was picked up after her performance by her new boyfriend, but longtime school friend, Paul Martin. So the source that I probably could have found it if I really poked around, but it didn't give an age on Paul Martin. But where the last couple was like 29 and 17, so there's that like kind of weird but age difference thing.
Yeah.
This girl was 15.
Like we kind of just like roll over that in stories like this because it's just like, it's if you think about it, it's pretty fucking weird. But more importantly, they were murdered.
Well, and you get to those ages at that time, and she was technically a minor, but it was whatever. That, or like you said, that wasn't the point of this.
There's just creepy, and there probably still are. It's just creepy age gaps that we just sort of. And age gaps in
relationships are weird because 29 and 17. Yeah, 29 and 17 is like, oh, she's 17 and you're 29. And then you go a few years older. If she was like 21 and he was 34, you wouldn't think that much of it. But then you keep going and it gets to a point where it gets weird again. Yeah. Like there's that middle ground where things even out. But anyway, the only reason I even stopped to point that out is this girl was 15 and it sounds like they were probably parked doing stuff. But the guy I think was, if not 15, probably pretty close in age because they were school classmates. Yeah. It wasn't necessarily the same grade, but he would have had to have been within a couple years of her at least.
And they did he picked her things with that brass
with her saxophone. Yeah. So just 5 hours after Paul had picked Betty Jo up, his body was discovered. 6 days later, Betty Jo's body was found 2 miles away. Again, the story that I read, and I'm sure I could have poked around, but it's not that important, didn't specify if they were found in a car, next to a car, by a car, whatever. It was just this young couple that were kind of sneaking off to spend time together, and they were murdered. So by now, of course, the town was aware that they were dealing with a serial killer. Citizens armed themselves to the point that the local gun shops were running out of guns and ammunition, locks and stuff, anything like that. People were, it's that kind of, I don't want to say hysteria because there was an actual killer on the loose. Although it's funny because they're arming themselves when all they really seem to have to do is stop parking in the middle of nowhere to have sex, and you're probably safe.
I'd rather die first.
That's fair.
Yeah. We are in Texarcana. There's nothing I'd rather do.
So one of the advantages of being in a town that's literally straddling the border of two states is that it meant there were two police departments involved in the investigation. But that was also one of the disadvantages, as it created communications issues and sometimes a lack of coordination. But the Texas Rangers were called in to assist. However, the attacks would continue. The last known victims of the Phantom were a married couple who were attacked in their home just outside of town. Virgil Starks was killed by 2 shots to the head, but despite also being shot twice in the face, his wife Katie managed to flee to a neighbor's house and survive.
Oh, okay.
Although sometimes you wonder, like, would you rather have been kill. I don't know what permanent, it could be a difference between being shot squarely in the face and like having a gash, where the bullets grazed you. But like, just the phrase being shot twice in the face, it's like, no, thank you.
Yeah, I feel like getting shot in the face. Like, I think I would rather just die, because it's like, at best, you become some like fucking Phantom of the Opera. Fuck. Yeah. More likely it hits your brain and like you're never the same again. And
I would imagine after being, even if it doesn't hit your brain, imagine after being shot twice in the face and watching your husband get shot in the head and killed, you're probably never going to be the same again.
Yeah, anyway. but I mean, like physically, your whole mental makeup is like, probably pretty fucked. But that makes it sound like you can't live a rich, fulfilling life. You know. Having that happen.
Yeah, that's one of those things. I think we all.
That's so bad to me that like my mind just switches off and it's like, fuck it, I would rather you kill me than figure out how to make this work.
Here's the thing that I can't help thinking in these stories, and this one even as I was like typing it up, is she fled to a neighbor's house to get help. But there's a pretty good chance in a situation like this that the killer follows you and just kills the neighbors too. So you might be like dragging other people into this
that's
murder
some horror
spree.
Movie shit.
Yeah.
Like, and honestly, I don't give a fuck. If I'm being chased by a killer, I will bring the entire neighborhood down with me. I will lead him through a chase through every house down my block until like I'll get killed by a neighbor who like I broke in trying to escape.
Do I really want to knock on the orphanage door? Yes, I do.
That's a machete. I'm kicking the door down.
So, they were the last of the known victims of the Phantom. Ultimately, over 400 people were arrested in connection with the murders, but none were ever charged. So it sounds like they were just like, hey, you're coming with us. Did you kill people?
It's pretty miraculous that, and maybe this is what happened, because if that's the end of it, of his spree, my guess is, like, it's Texarcana. They have nothing to do but fuck in the middle of the road and shoot things. So I know there had to be a dad who was like, I know it's not legal, but here's a fucking gun. And the moment somebody tries some shit, you blow their brains out and just dump their body.
That's a good point. Like maybe somebody like killed the murderer but was afraid, they never came forward that they did. Yeah. I would have guessed, given the hysteria, that people would be very happy to claim that they killed the murderer. What generally happens is that the person gets arrested for something else and the murder stopped because they're in jail, but nobody really connects the two. In fact, for many, most of the most likely suspect was a man named Ewell Sweeney.
Oh, he definitely did that shit.
Yeah, with a name like that.
Yeah.
Ewell was arrested for auto theft a few years after the murder, and at the time, his wife even confessed to authorities that her husband was the killer. However, wives weren't allowed to testify against their husbands because our legal system always makes perfect fucking sense and is never filled with stupid arbitrary rules. Like it was literally
knew that, you had one argument about dishes. Next thing you know, she's telling them that you're a fucking serial killer. And I
didn't look into that. That's a good point because I bet it was women couldn't testify against their husbands. I bet you anything husbands could testify against their wives, though. Like, I'm sure that was a very one-sided...
It depends on whether or not you have a legal mistress. And then the judge would be like, oh, he's a credible witness.
They wouldn't accept her confession, but she ended up kind of recanting it anyway, which doesn't necessarily mean anything either. But
that means he came up to her with a big gun and said, hey, you should recant.
Shut your mouth, woman. We better not ever make out in a car or else I'll have to kill us both. There was a carpenter that went missing in the year after Ewell got arrested and he was still in jail. And for whatever reason, like it didn't give a good reason for it, but it said that this carpenter's disappearance was suspected to be this killer too. Which I hope they had more reason to it than just this guy disappeared because it wouldn't fit the MO at all. So I don't know why you would just assume that it was the killer. But so some people use that as proof that Ewell couldn't have been the killer because there was another supposed killing while he was in jail, but whatever. Ultimately, the killer was never caught, and the murders just seemed to kind of stop altogether after the attack on Starks. Though there were a few survivors, authorities never had a good description of the killer because he was said to have been wearing either a white mask or a light-colored sack with eye holes, which is funny and terrifying because it's like a sack with eye holes, and then I picture like
the more elaborate mask gets is like the fucking lamer.
Yeah, like they're murdering you, but you're like, man, the craftsmanship on that mask is awesome. You want it to be just this terrifying, rudimentary, like, psychopath thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's why, I always thought Michael Myers was a, effective horror symbol.
And that's kind of what I'm picturing here.
Take a very fucking generic man and flip the mask inside out to make it more generic. And now you're a murderer. So interestingly, the Texarkana Phantom Killer is possibly the origin of the popular urban legend about two lovers who, while parked in a secluded sexy time spot, hear the report of a killer on the radio and decide to leave, only to find the killer's hook hand still hanging from the car door handle when they arrive home. There are a lot of variations on that. I remember my dad telling that exact, scary story to us when we were kids, like 4 or 5 years old. He was just trying to fuck us up. I think that I always thought that was a really funny ending to a scary story
because there's a killer out there like my fucking hand.
Yeah. And now he's fucked.
Now I will never kill again.
Yeah, now he doesn't get a fucking hook, and I
can't go back and buy another hook hand. That'll be suspicious.
I got my girl, and I got your hand, dumbass. But
no, I do remember. I have a very vivid memory. My dad, he's the kind of guy who tells the same stories over and over. But I remember him telling it to us one time we were having a sleepover. We weren't 4 or 5. I'm joking about that. My dad wasn't a psychopath.
My dad told me that shit when I was 5. Absolutely.
The other interesting thing to me is that the town of Texarcana has seemed to like fully embrace the history of these murders. Like, it's not completely uncommon to have like a tour of, these kind of legendary spots or something. But a lot of times when your town has a serial killer that goes uncaught, it's kind of more of a blemish or whatever. But they're like, no, fuck it. In 1976, there was a movie called The Town That Dreaded Sundown, which is kind of a weak title in my opinion, but whatever. Yeah. But it was about these murders, and in the film, a lot of the townspeople served as extras, so they were actually in it, people that lived through these events. And now, even to this day, every year around Halloween, they have a big public showing of this film. Like, they basically celebrate this. So I guess if you want to be a serial killer, go do it in Texarkana, because you'll become a hero for some reason. Maybe not a hero, but you'll
definitely
be celebrated as a... Yeah. I know, that's kind of it was a disappointing name for a serial killer. Because, like, Phantom also kind of assumes some, like... spooky, like, stealthness, like he just appeared. And this guy just fucking walked up with a gun and was like, I'm going to kill you.
We're going to tread dangerously close to giving serial killers any credit, which I don't want to do. But when newspapers are left to their own devices, they really suck at naming killers. So,
yeah.
Like the Zodiac... that he had to write letters to be like, hey, because I know you're going to call me Ghost or some shit.
It's a peekaboo killer. Damn it. Maybe that's what happened. This guy hated the nickname he got, so he moved to a new town and started again.
Until they give him something good. That's his one thing. He has his whole fucking MO set up, but he just can't come up with a name. And once a town settles on something with you, they couldn't even name their town. Of course they couldn't name their killer.
The gun shooty killer. Yeah. We're just going to combine 2 words The
Go Killer.
But it was interesting to me that there was like an actual, and there's other ones. I think was it the Zodiac that was also killing like couples like this, or was that the Golden State? There's been other like pretty famous serial killers. Yeah.
Like, I know that just shows me that couples, but I don't know if that was exclusive.
Yeah. That tells me that you're a serial killer, but you're a very, like, uncreative one, because you're just falling to, like, the most cliche lover's lane killer, like, trope that there is. You're not even
I was
creative.
watching a thing, and sorry to sidetrack, but I was watching a thing, and maybe you might have even told this story on here before, but it was about this couple who were, like, on a date, and the date was going, like, really badly. And the guy was like, oh, fuck, I got, like, nothing to lose here. The last chance to impress her, like, let's go on a hike on this trail nearby which, you know, sounds really scary. At the end of a bad date. And
I would hope most women that would be a red flag and they'd say no.
Well, and she said, she was more like, well, can't get any worse. Let's go. If you kill me, at least it'll be over. So they go on this hike, and they actually start having a good time. And then, like, they hear some shit in the bushes. And the guy, as they're walking, the guy, like, steps on something. And he doesn't know, it's not ground. And he doesn't know what he stepped on. And he, like, stops the girl, and he hears more noises in the bushes and shit, and they run away. And then, like, they ended up getting married. And after, like, years, Ted Bundy was on the news or some interview or some shit, and he was like, yeah, there was one time where I was sure I was going to get caught, and I was off in the woods with this trail, and this couple they were, like, just feet away from me in the act, and yeah, it was them. So
that would be creepy as hell, because if you did discover him, you might have caught him, but there, you know, his next thing is he's going to attack you.
Yeah,
so.
It's fucking Ted Bundy, you know.
Yeah, I can't imagine him being like, "Fuck, you got me. Fair enough." Like,
I mean,
in fact,
they are.
It shows some restraint on his end that he didn't attack them, because, frankly, if it was me, by that point, I think you're like, "Uh-oh,
well,
gonna have to
that
get
is
these."
a thing though about the psychology of serial killers, is like they're fucking bitches at their core. Like, they don't like. They enjoy violence completely under their control.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
They don't want to get into a fight.
Well, and
that's why they always wait for a moment to, like, pull a gun on you and tie you up and shit.
And I almost said that when at the very start of the story, when we were talking about the first survivor that was running to the woods, and you're like, fuck it. I would have been like, I'm not listening to you. That's exactly what you should do. If you're ever attacked, like, when somebody pulls a gun and says, come with me, you run, because maybe they'll shoot you. A, there's a good chance they'll miss, but B, most of the time they didn't plan on you running. And like you said, as soon as they're not in control, they usually will be like, well, fuck this, I'm out.
Like the moment, and I get like I said, I understand the mentality, because the moment you blow a situation up, you don't know how they're going to respond.
Right.
Because, you know, people panic, and especially when somebody has a gun, like, if they panic, it's very likely they're going to shoot you. You know, if you think you're just getting robbed or something,
that's the key. I think that's where the successful ones is they don't let you think that they make you believe that there's a chance they're going to let you go, and they're not going to. But I hadn't told that story. Maybe you had talked about it, because it sounds a little familiar. Like, it might have come up on another episode or something. But no, that's creepy as shit. Although it's funny that it took almost like, I imagine what he stepped on was probably the body.
I think
or something.
Some, maybe that, or just like a bundle of, like, bloody clothes or some shit.
Yeah. But all it took was, like, stepping on an active crime scene, and you fall in love and get married.
Yeah. Hey, fear is, like, it's a powerful force.
Do you think when they go through, like, rocky points in there, because, you know, couples tend to have them, like, to rekindle, do they just, like, go look for, like, active crime scenes? Like, maybe they have a police scanner in the car, like The Incredibles, and they hear a bank being robbed, and they're like, let's go walk past and see how close we can get to it.
I think they would both be looking at each other and be like, you know, I ran into Ted Bundy, and and survived while I was with them. So they're like my good luck charm. Like, if you can like survive an encounter with like the worst serial killer in American history, then like, you know, it would take a lot for me. I'm not saying I wouldn't.
Do you think they have those T-shirts like "We stepped on Ted Bundy"?
We survived
1987 or something.
Like a roller coaster.
So, anyway, second one. This is one that's really kind of creepy, and this was really what made me decide to like kind of give that content warning at the beginning. But it's the murder of Dorothy Jane Scott. So starting in 1980, single mother Dorothy Jane Scott began receiving threatening phone calls at her aunt's home where her son Sean lived. Sometimes the mystery caller would profess his love for Dorothy, and other times the calls would turn dark, with the caller violently threatening her.
Guys rock, right, fellas?
Yeah. Even more concerning was the fact that the caller would often relay information about where Dorothy had been, what she'd been doing, what she'd been wearing, who she'd talked to, making it very clear that whoever was calling was also physically stalking her. You know, it wasn't just some random, like, kind of prank caller fixated on her, but he clearly knew who she was and was watching her, you know, day-to-day movements. During one such call, the caller told Dorothy to come outside because he had something for her. When she walked outside for some fucking reason, in her front yard, she found a single dead rose left on her car's windshield. Like, I don't know if it's because it was 1980 and like this whole like telecommunications stalking was like somehow still new or something, but these calls, like, immediately you'd be like, witness protection program. And then if the caller calls, it's like, I have something for you outside. I'm like, well, I'm not fucking going outside then. Like, that's the answer to that phone call. Then you hang up. You call as many people as you know that have guns, and you say, come over to my house.
Well, what you do is, like, you gotta, like, it's tough because you're scared, but you got to lure them in to be like, no, I do love you. You should come over. And then
I would go outside, but I'm in my bathrobe and I can't go out there. And then when they come barging through the door, you hit them in the face with something.
And that's when you have your friends with their 15 shotguns. In Texarkana.
You never know who the guy was because there's nothing left of him after the smoke clears.
Blow him to hell and take what's left to Texarkana and dump him off.
So she and her family were, of course, concerned, but they didn't know what to do about it. I'm curious because you used to feel like, well, we don't know what to do about this. I assume they went to the police, but again, this is the kind of thing that, especially back then, but even still today, tends to be like, well, what do you want us to do about somebody calling you? It's like, fucking find them and arrest them.
Yeah, that's like, well, what did you say to them?
Oh, right. So I kind of imagine it was something like that. I don't think it was that they tried nothing and didn't know what to do, but they couldn't really physically do anything about it, so they just tried their best to ignore the caller. On the evening of May 28th, 1980, Dorothy dropped her son Sean off at her parents' house so that she could attend a staff meeting at work. During the meeting, her coworker Conrad Bostron, it looks like Boston with an R shoved in there, was visibly unwell, and she offered to drive him to the hospital. And when I read that part, I was like, I know where this is going, but I didn't. Another coworker named Pam Head, which is a fucking great name, decided to accompany them. So it wasn't just, Dorothy going off with this coworker that seemed mysteriously sick. It was the three of them. So she stopped at her parents' house first to check on her son. I didn't put this in my notes, but it was said that she was wearing a black scarf and she changed into a red one because, that's important. And then they continued to the hospital. At the hospital, it was determined that Conrad was suffering the effects of a black widow spider bite. So I thought you'd like that part.
Yeah, that's sick.
Yeah. So he was actually sick. It wasn't like I thought, oh, this guy's like kind of faking it to get alone with his coworker, and he's clearly the stalker. No, he was fucking dying of a black widow bite.
Black widow. Put him in a perfect situation.
So after receiving some treatment, he was cleared to leave. While the coworker Pam was assisting Conrad with the discharge paperwork, Dorothy left to retrieve the car from the parking garage. But when Dorothy failed to show up at the patient pickup area, Pam and Conrad decided to walk to the garage themselves. Pam's car was still there when they walked up to it was like on the 3rd level. But when the two of them appeared, the car sped off. Due to it being dark and the headlights coming towards them and kind of blinding them, they couldn't see who was in the car. Initially, the pair thought an emergency had come up with Dorothy's son, but when they still hadn't heard from her a few hours later, they reported her missing. The first sentence is interesting to me because I was thinking about it. This was 1980. Nobody had cell phones. So this was kind of one of those, like, yeah, I could see like them thinking, oh, God, she had to leave real quick. There must be something wrong. And it's probably her son, because that's what you would assume. But it's like, well, how would she have known? Like, I guess maybe stopped at a payphone and called to check in or something. But anyway, that was their initial assumption. But when they didn't hear from her, they reported her missing. Around 4:30 that morning, Dorothy's car was discovered burning in an alley about 10 miles away, but there was no sign of Dorothy herself. A week after her disappearance, her mother received a call on their home phone. The caller asked if the woman was related to Dorothy, and when her mother said she was, he simply said, "I've got her," and hung up. So that's a great phone call to get when your daughter's been missing for a week.
Yeah.
The parents would continue to receive these kind of calls, but despite police bugging, basically, they installed a recording device. The caller would never stay on the line long enough to be traced, which, again, like, you read that, and I'm like, that's too much of a movie thing, but apparently it was a real-life thing, too. In June, Dorothy's father approached the local paper and asked that they run a story about their daughter's disappearance, which would have been about a couple weeks to a month later. After the story ran, an editor by the name of Pat Riley received a phone call from a man who claimed that he had loved Dorothy, but had caught her cheating on him, and when she denied it, he killed her. And then this guy hung up. Nearly 4 years after her disappearance, construction workers working near Santa Ana Canyon Road would find the charred remains of what turned out to be an adult female and also a dog. But by August 1884, the remains would be positively identified as Dorothy's, though it believed that the charring part was actually from a brush fire that had swept through the area 2 years earlier. So it wasn't that she was like killed and the body was burned. It was that she was dumped and then happened to be caught in this like wildfire. The phone calls to Dorothy's parents had stopped in April of that year, which puts it at 4 years after her disappearance. So that's pretty fucking sick, like, to be receiving these like taunting phone calls for 4 years. But they stopped in April, but after the remains were discovered, they resumed again. The last call came in 1984, though, so shortly after that, when the caller asked Dorothy's mother simply, "Is Dorothy home?" So that's kind of the end of it. They never caught anybody. There was no real suspects. Like, she wasn't dating anybody. She didn't have any like jilted lovers. There was one article I came across that there was a guy, and I didn't bother putting his name down because it was one of these things where a few people were like, oh, you know, it was like the brother of a coworker who happened to also work across the street. So he would have technically like had opportunity to see a lot of, like, if he was watching her, you know, he was there. Yeah. But some people were like, oh, this guy's kind of weird, and he might have been fixated on her, and it was probably him. But everything that I read suggested that there was nothing at all that implicated the guy, which is why I didn't even bother putting his name down, even though it's been 40 years. It's like, I hate to, like, you know how many times some guy that's just a little different gets accused of like something horrible just because people think he's different.
I mean, it's especially when there's like no actual like concrete leads. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, who's the weirdest people in this person's life, you know? Right.
And that doesn't say that it couldn't have been him, but at this, given that and given the little tiny amount of research we actually do on the show, I didn't think it was important.
But it also could have been a fucking, like, you know, customer or some shit or wherever she worked, like
family member even. Like, I mean, it could have been a fucking anybody. But that one made my list because it's terrible, and in today's context, it's fucking terrifying because we're seeing a rise of this stuff online with like doxing and that kind of stuff. I was going to say, like,
with technology and shit now, it's a lot easier to.
And I think the problem is,
fucking
it's
her ass.
easy for a lot of people to be like, it's just online stuff. It's, you're making too big of a deal about it. Don't get so worked up. That's what they're trying to get. This is the exact kind of story why you can't just ignore it, because
well, I mean, like, by and large, the people fucking with you on the internet are just fucking with you on the internet.
Yeah, because they're worthless pieces of crap.
There are a lot of stories of people taking it further. And it's fucking frightening what they can do. Like, they can, like, get, not just find out where you live, like, they can get access to all your shit,
Yeah, and anymore, like, I read one of a, I think, I don't remember who she was, but she's currently going through it. She's either a streamer or, a games journalist, or I think it was more of a streamer type, or just online personality, where she's currently going through a doxing attack. Yeah, right. Where they're releasing public information about her kids, and it's like, that's we don't need to say that don't do that, but like, it's terrifying. Like, I'm the kind of person
our listeners need to be told not to do that. Let's like,
well, right,
dude,
and don't listen to us
your internet,
and go walk into the sea. Right. But that's the part that appealed to me about this story, is that it does have a lot of relevance today, just in slightly different context, and it's terrifying. Like, it's horror movie terrifying, where you're being like creepily, the calls coming from inside the house type shit.
Just knowing my personality, though, and I can't imagine like the devastation those parents feel. I will say though, after the 5th call, I would be done with that shit. Where it's just like, yeah, fucking whatever, dude. Just hang up, like, because it's like, I'm not gonna get anything out of this. Like,
and I kind of imagine it got to that point. And it's one of those things where you don't want to do this, but like, in my head, I'm thinking, well, couldn't you have like tried to trick him into staying on the line? Be like, no, you didn't. You don't have my daughter. She's right here in the living room.
At that point, I think my like grief would be to the point that I would have no problem unplugging my phone forever. Like, because fuck it, my kid's dead. I don't.
From some creepy ass serial killer.
What the fuck do I want to talk to anyone for at this point?
I don't know. I'm the kind of person that I have this really bad vengeful streak. Not when it comes to petty little stuff, but if it's something like that, I would try to be like,
we would all want
Liam Neeson from Taken.
Shit,
Yeah. I couldn't, because I don't have those abilities and I'm not intimidating. But you would just, I feel like I would get this singular, like, John Wick type.
None of them prepare me for what I'm about to try to do.
Unless you need auto and home insurance, in which case I might be prepared to help you.
Return my daughter, or this could be really bad for me. Please.
And then this last one was just more of a interesting from the like cast of suspects list, but so the murder itself we'll go through pretty quickly. William Desmond Taylor was a hugely successful silent film director and star in the second decade of the 1900s, which was the quickest way I found to say from like 1912 to like 1922 or so.
Yeah.
I think that was when he was most successful and popular. On the morning of February 2nd, 1922, his body was found in his bungalow by his valet, Henry Peavy. Given Taylor's fame, a crowd soon gathered, and a man stepped forward to identify himself as a doctor. The unidentified doctor examined the body and declared that William Desmond Taylor had died of a stomach hemorrhage. Embarrassingly for the doctor, the more probable cause of death was quickly determined to be the result of the giant bullet hole in the back of the man. I say giant, it was actually a small caliber bullet hole.
A heart attack as his head's like hanging off. Like,
right.
I love doctors, especially back then, dude. What a fucking useless quack.
Well, in fairness, I've talked about it a little bit before, but my background's I went through criminal justice, pursuing law enforcement.
It's clear the tumor popped out, loaded a 9mm.
Some of those small caliber bullet holes aren't immediately obvious because it's like the skin kind of flaps back over it and you don't always bleed heavily out. From the sounds of the story, what happened, the guy that said he was a doctor and said it was a stomach hemorrhage, after they're like, no, it's a bullet hole. Like, he basically disappeared and was never, came forward as like, I was that doctor, because he was probably really fucking embarrassed.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. It's like, it's an honest mistake, and it's that thing of like, if you're in any profession, you see, sometimes you're too absorbed in the details of what you do. So it's an honest mistake. But what's funny is the idea of this guy like really analyzing this body and some dude walking by being like, oh, hey, that guy got shot.
You'd be like, oh, that was a great, like, good perception. Where did you go to medical school? It's like, I'm the janitor. And you're like, fuck. Well, I'm moving to Mexico. like the doctor says was never seen again, but not never seen again necessarily. Like, I don't picture like, oh, he'd vanished. It was like, nobody is going to come forward and say, I'm the idiot that said he like died of a stomach hemorrhage when there was a bullet in the back of him. But, anyway, unlike the prior two cases I've discussed today, which gained notoriety due to their near complete and utter lack of suspect, what makes Williams' murder so interesting is the long, colorful list of possible killers. Like many cases involving famous people even today, the investigation was also hampered by like mishandling and disappearance of evidence, wild speculation in the media, and even supposedly by a push from like the powerful, shadowy like Hollywood,
Hollywood elite.
Like, I kind of feel like it's been a long, long time since I've played it, but I kind of feel like there was a chapter or mission in L.A. Noire that was kind of probably based on this or something similar, where there were all sorts of conspiracy theories that like Hollywood didn't want the police really investigating this murder because they were uncovered. They're worried they'd uncover like other stuff.
Yeah.
The same kind of like QAnon stuff we hear about today with like, oh, the Hollywood's all a big pedophile ring, which sadly there's a lot of that.
Yeah. But, I'm not saying I agree with every conspiracy theory, but if you want to tell me Hollywood has a dark, fucked up top of the tower, I totally believe that.
Oh, yeah. Like, I've literally met people that think every single person that's a famous actor is a pedophile and they like sex traffic. It's like, no.
No, but that's a fair assumption if you're ever out to dinner with them.
Especially if you're 8.
Don't be prejudiced, but don't be stupid either. Protect yourself.
Yeah. Don't eat the Jell-O.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the kind of stuff that was swirling around, and that didn't help the investigate. Spoiler alert, this one was not solved either. So one of the suspects, probably the first suspect, was a man named Edward Sands. He was probably, at least for many, the most likely. He had been Taylor's personal valet, but had been fired 7 months prior to the murder because he had been caught forging Taylor's signature on checks, as well as stealing from Taylor's home. So it sounds like fired with cause.
I don't agree with that. Dude's dead.
Yeah, well,
be able to use this shit.
No, I mean, he was doing this stuff prior to. That's why he got fired. Yeah.
So you got to kill him first, and then use his cards.
Right. So he was a very clear suspect because it was like, was this a disgruntled fired employee? This kind of thing. But others considered him a scapegoat for that larger conspiracy, like it said. But regardless of whether there even was a conspiracy, it's more likely that Sands may have been unfairly accused of the murder or even the crimes that led to his firing due to the fact that he was African American.
Yeah.
So that's kind of one of those things that it's like, oh, the black man did it. And then I threw in, there's nothing I read that suggested that Taylor, unfairly pinned it on racist reasons and fired him. But that stuff happened a lot.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I mean, especially. That shit happens now.
Right.
Imagine how it was fucking, 100 years ago.
So, like, whether, like, any of these allegations or how, like, likely a suspect he actually was, I'm suspect just based on that one fact. And then just because he was African-American doesn't mean he couldn't have been the killer, but surely you got to kind of to really take some pause approaching it, too, because it's the easy person to pin it on.
Yeah. It would take a very fucked up brain to be like, you caught me stealing, you son of a bitch. I'm gonna murder you for that.
Right. Unless you were unfairly accused of stealing and then you murdered him for that. But who knows? But anyway, some people say what kind of leads to his possible guilt is the fact that after the murders, he was never seen or heard from again, this Edward Sands. Though, again, in the absence of any other evidence, he would have probably been pretty damn smart to lay low. Right. Yeah. Because if people are like, this black man probably did it, there's a long history of people being immediately convicted and hung.
I mean, you're being accused of theft.
And you're not getting a fair trial, is my point. It's 1920.
I would fucking bounce too, if I could.
So, yeah, if you want to use why did he go on the lam? It's like, because maybe he wasn't stupid. Like,
that's always the dumbest shit to me. It's like, well, why'd you try to run? It's because you guys are fucked up.
Yeah,
I've seen society fuck this up.
We have countless episodes about the justice system completely and utterly failing.
If you get a window to get the fuck out of Dodge, get the fuck out of Dodge.
Yeah. So another suspect was a woman named Mabel Normad. Normad, they all have weird names. But Mabel was a popular comedic actress and allegedly one of William Taylor's lovers. Police quickly ruled her out as a suspect. It seemed like she had a pretty solid alibi.
And a great joke.
But they did. She cracked him up so much they just let her. They're like, you're too funny. Even if you did it, get out of here. Get out of here.
If we hadn't ruled out Gutbuster as a cause of death, then you would be in big trouble. But
but no, yeah, she was ruled out as a suspect. But the storyline kind of emerged that she had been addicted to cocaine.
Hell yeah!
And as part of his attempt to help her get clean, William had been pursuing charges against her dealers, her suppliers. So one theory is that these yeah, well, I mean, if
it's a treatment plan, okay.
It's very common in human nature, though. Like if somebody you care about has a problem, to try to like pretend like they're innocent and it's these other people's fault because they're the ones selling her the drugs, and it's like, well, they're not helping.
I mean, they're not innocent.
No,
but if I were those dealers, I would be like, what the fuck? Just I didn't even know it was like that, dude. Like,
but that's a pretty good theory in my opinion, because the last people you want to fuck with are drug dealers. And if you're like, look, you keep selling to my lady, so I'm going to get you arrested. The theory is that they hired a hitman to take him out because they're like, fuck you, we don't want to be arrested.
Yeah.
And given what I know about drug dealers today, that seems likely. I don't know what drug dealers were like in 1920.
Probably the most black and white. It was about the same.
I would imagine, yeah. I mean, they had a lot of money, they had a lot at stake, and they did not want to go to jail.
Yeah,
so,
and I mean, it's like, and also like, you know, the fact that this is an unsolved murder is proof that, like, you know, there's a lot of those like sort of hit jobs that, you know, you can't really tie down to any one particular thing.
Pretty clear that the police investigation didn't go super smoothly either, and that would explain a lot of that, because a lot of times these organizations are tied in with the law enforcement. So like in my mind reading through this, that was one of those that I was like, I mean, there's not a lot of evidence to support it, but it's like, I could see that. I mean, it makes sense. I wouldn't like convict somebody based on it sounding good, but it makes sense in my head.
Yeah.
Then there was Mary Miles Minter, which you gotta love alliteration, although I think that was a stage name.
Mary's Mile Minter Murder.
She was hopeful to become a famous actress so that she could sell like shill gum. Mary Miles Minter Minty Gum. Mary Minter was a young protege of Taylor's who also developed a strong romantic feelings for him. Some sources allege that their relationship did become sexual when she was 17, which would put William at the age of 47, looping all the way back to the start of our podcast today, where it's like, oh, that gross, like, predatory, like, this would fall under the grooming category.
This, you know, when we say fucking Hollywood has a some dark corners, this is one of them.
Right. It happens a lot. And it's very easy for a very famous, established, you know, Hollywood type to convince a young girl that's hopeful that, like, oh, well, I'll make you famous, but also we love each other and you're going to sleep with me. Police did find a collection of love letters written to William from Mary in William's home. However, Mary insisted that her feelings for William were completely unrequited, that he had flat out told her that, no, you're too young for me. And it seemed to be the case. It seemed like she
was a silent director, so he did it through cue cards.
Well, it was kind of refreshing to hear a guy that was in a position like this be like, no, like, this is wrong. I'm not. Now, whether he actually did that or whether they were doing it, who knows? Because she vouched and said, no, I wanted to, but he didn't. But you would also say that if you loved an older guy and you didn't want his name to be besmirched. Yeah. So who knows? But they ruled her out, though, as a suspect. However, many others suspected her mother, Charlotte Shelby, was the murderer. Charlotte was well known as a manipulative, power-hungry woman who may have been using her daughter and her daughter's relationship with William for her own ulterior motives. So again, the classic Hollywood, conniving.
Yeah, there's almost like a child actor fucked up thing happening here too.
Yeah, like maybe she was kind of pushing her daughter to hopefully there was some incriminating situation, and then Charlotte could use that for her own, to blackmail him or something.
This whole case is like Hollywood conspiracy bingo. It's
right.
You got fucking racism. You got fucking potential pedophilia.
And if it happened today, you'd be like, that's just too cliche. But in 1920, it's like, this is, again, it's kind of with the Phantom Killer of Texarcana. It's kind of cool seeing kind of some of the origins of these cliches. Where these stories really started to crop up from actual, events.
Yeah.
It seemed like Charlotte was one of these people that people wanted to dislike because, again, it makes for a juicy, gossipy story. It seems like she wasn't particularly well liked. Doesn't seem like there was a ton of evidence that would support that. Yeah. For instance, I never read anything. It's like, oh, she was manipulative and she was using this situation for her own good. It's like, well, what good would killing the guy do?
Yeah, what's a fucking murder charge get you at the end of the
day? Right. The only thing that was interesting is that it was known that she owned a very rare gun that was very similar to the one used to kill William, and that after his murder, she threw the gun into a bayou in Louisiana to get rid of it so it would never be found. But again, that doesn't look great. But if you think people are trying to pin a murder on you and you think that that's what they're trying to use to do it, even if you didn't do it, you might be like, well, fuck it. I'm getting rid of this gun because I didn't do it.
If she had a gun, then that means the daughter had potential access to the same gun.
That's true. She could be covering for her daughter.
Yeah.
And then finally, and best of all, in the worst possible ways, and it's just going to loop back to the first suspect, was Henry Peavy. As mentioned, Henry was Mr. Taylor's current valet and also the man to discover Taylor's body. Police subjected Henry to intense interrogation after the murder, probably because he was black, but determined that he was not a viable suspect. So the police didn't suspect him. And I say probably because he was black. I'm sure that didn't help. But also, you do tend to, if you are doing your job right, that's the kind of person that you want to interview because they were first to discover the body. So you don't just dismiss them like, oh, you couldn't have done it. But anyway, my point is he wasn't officially a suspect for very long. But an intrepid reporter who, I'm sure, was driven by instinct and no other motive, was determined that Peavy was, in fact, the killer. So she concocted a brilliant plan to trick him into confessing. So under the guise of wanting to write to do a simple interview with him for a newspaper piece, she asked Mr. Peavy to show her to Taylor's burial plot. She knew which cemetery he was in, but not which one was his grave. And of course she needed to know for her piece. Her assumption was that Peavy would be very afraid of ghosts and vengeful spirits, due, of course, to the fact that he was black. Right. So because he's black, he's obviously into this, voodoo, spirits own, bad, mumber, the most racist fucking stereotype.
Fucking racist, fucking private dick, gumshoe, bullshit instinct. I'm going to get to the bottom of this.
It gets better. So she asked him to escort her to the grave that she didn't know where it was at. But, of course, they knew where it was at. So she had a colleague hiding near the gravesite so that when Peavy escorted her there, he would step out covered in a white fucking sheet to convince Peavy that he was, in fact, the ghost of Taylor. At which point, Peavy would, of course, utter a confession in some, racist cliche phrase.
Jesus Christ, dude. You're going to come out in a white sheet?
Well, this guy is black. He obviously is scared of ghosts, and this will work.
Yeah. Ghosts. That's it.
People are so... And they're not any smarter today. Smarter is the wrong word. They're equally awful. We'll put it that way. But... her assumption that they would scare the shit out of him, and he was obviously guilty, and he's, I'm sorry for murdering you, Mr. Taylor, blah, 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 don't take me to the underworld, whatever. But because Peavy was not, as the clearly racist reporter is, a moron, he did not fall for it. He even noted that, to the pair, that Mr. Taylor, who, mind you, was famous for being a silent movie star, was actually Irish and spoke with a thick Irish accent, whereas the unconvincing man under the sheet spoke with a Boston accent.
You happen to speak like everybody else who's chased me in a white sheet in my life.
Right, like this. But that was hilarious to me that they didn't even think to try to copy what the guy sounded like, because they didn't know what he sounded like. He was a silent movie star.
We all turn into Southie Boston types. When we die. So he was my favorite of this quote-unquote suspects because he was a non-suspect, and not because I think racism is funny. It's the opposite, clearly. But because of the complete and utter, bare... this person was racist to the point of being that fucking stupid that they thought a guy under a sheet would work. That's where your racism is it always makes you stupid to be racist, but it lays that completely bare here in this story. If you mapped out Sherlock Holmes's IQ on a graph, these idiots would be on the polar opposite extreme of that axis. Just unfucking believably dumb.
When reading through the story, you could see what they were trying to go, and immediately it was pretty obvious that, when they said assuming by his spiritual nature, and it's God damn it. But I assumed that they were going to take him there, and the guy from behind a tree would be oh, he stepped out in a fucking sheet. How do you concoct that plan?
That's the thing. You have to be... Your racism has to be so ingrained to formulate a plan like that. Of all the things we talked about tonight, I was not expecting one of the fucking dumbest fucking murder strategies. That is a step above... Actually, a step below. I would respect it more if you did that shit where you tried to catch a rabbit with a carrot in a box.
If there's a chance that could work.
That could actually work. This was so fucking stupid.
That's why I had to... He was actually further up the list of suspects, just in ordering, and I'm nope, this has to be the end of the episode, because that...
Yeah.
But,
it's funny,
and again, it's not
all these
possibilities
and suspicions and intrigue.
And then
And then it's we all got sidetracked for these idiots who concocted the stupidest fucking plan ever.
And again, I don't want to laugh off racism. We're both in very fortunate positions where we can't even begin to imagine what it's like to have people just make that kind of assumption about you, that you're that.
If in our defense, we are absolutely laughing at racism today.
I'm laughing at racists. Yeah,
we're not laughing with racists.
But anyway, so that was his murder was never solved either, of course. And it seemed like a lot of as interesting as some of those storylines are, like you said, the possible pedophilia, her manipulative mother, that's right out of Hollywood.
Most things in Hollywood, it gets away from what could be interesting and goes to the dumbest thing.
Well, but even the interesting stuff was largely likely untrue and 100% driven by Hollywood tabloids, because he was famous and that's what grabbed a hold. And literally,
but the thing they settled on ended up being just as false and stupider.
Yeah.
So
The funny part is he probably just had such a massive stomach hemorrhage that it blew a hole in the back of him. The first doctor was right.
He actually ate a bullet and his stomach blew up and the bullet came out the other way.
Right. The first doctor was 100% right, but he had to like flee in shame and embarrassment.
And just before the end, he found out, he's like, I knew it. Well,
or some co-star in a movie is like, you cut all my dialogue, and he's like, it's a silent fucking movie, you idiot. He's like, I don't care, and shoots him in the back.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's what I had this week. I
liked it. It went places I was not expecting, for sure.
That's always the key. Yeah.
Yep, we're shock artists here on the Non-Essential Podcast.
The shock part is that we're still doing this after. But anyway,
I'm gonna be 30 in a couple of weeks, and that's like that. And that's crazy to think. Like, I've been doing this since I was 20.
Yeah,
in some form, and that's
a whole. So that means a third of your life has been wasted.
Yeah,
the podcast. Yeah,
that's all right. People waste it on stupider things, trying to catch murderers through fucking dumbass 1920s cartoon tactics.
I mean, that's like one of the games. Like, I'll throw a sheet over me, like when my daughter, like, I'll pretend to hide from her and throw a sheet over. It doesn't trick my 2-year-old, but whatever.
All right, well, I could talk about a guy like unintentionally joining the Ku Klux Klan all day, but
yeah, we're quite a bit over. I thought my notes ended up being 6 pages long, and I was like, yeah, it's fine. That's a way to come back. Yeah,
we need to give them some content this week.
Yeah, make up for our absence. But
thanks for bearing with us through that. We should be back to some normalcy. Yeah, good to be back. We'll see you next week. Have a fun time.